All right, welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of the Open Source Hangout. Today we're going to be talking about ideal package management for browsers, and we have a couple of guests joining us. We have Dusty, Stefan, Lori, and Guy from various teams, and they're going to be very helpful in that discussion. We are live streaming this today on July 16th, 2014 at 9 p.m. Central Time. I'm your host, Sean Massa, and today's co-host is Trek.
Hi, everyone. Do you want me to introduce myself if people don't know who I am?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. My name is Trek. I'm if you know who I am, it's probably because I'm on the Ember.js core team. I'm also a user interface engineer at Groupon in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm also a user interface engineer at Groupon. Trek and I work on the same team at
We
Groupon.
do work on the same team. We just happen to have formed.
Yeah, so that's pretty awesome. I think it's useful to describe like what this podcast is going to be about in the future for anyone who's a little confused on the topic. It's called Open Source Hangouts. I want it to be a way for developers to talk to each other about developing open source. So that's the main concept. And that can include things that are really specific, like maybe one time we want to talk about CSS preprocessors and how they work and how you can best use them. And maybe sometimes we'll talk about the legal aspects of licensing open source projects and making money off of them or something like that. So it's going to span a couple of different areas, but it's always related to open source development in some way. Our hosts may or may not change week to week, but we plan to run this weekly every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central. I will always be here. I think Trek will often be here, but we'll play that by ear. And everyone's feedback is going to be very helpful in shaping like how the show works in the future. For example, we had some issues earlier getting Google Hangouts on Air set up, although I think next time we'll be able to make that much smoother. But if someone has a suggestion for a different way to run this, definitely let us know. Or if you want to just contribute your awesome podcasting setup and we just call in through Skype or something, maybe you could do that too. So that's what the podcast is about. This is the first one. We're running weekly. We already have the next two scheduled. So
Do you want to say what those are?
Yeah. So next week we're going to be talking about getting started with open source contribution. So maybe you're a developer who uses open source, but you really want to get started commenting on issues, raising issues, maybe even making a pull request. But those really big projects that you like to use, like Rails or Ember, are sort of intimidating, and you aren't really sure, like, how do you break into this? How do you get started being someone who contributes to open source in some way? So we're going to be talking about that next week, and then 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about how do you fund open source companies, and by that I mean the company's main product is something that is open source. What are the different models that work in different ways for them to still make money but still have like this core open source product. So if either of those are interesting to you, the events will also be on this Google Hangouts on Air unless we decide to change the format. But all of that will be communicated out in the coming weeks. So if you're interested in those, definitely stay tuned for those. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, there are a couple of news items that Trek and I wanted to talk about before we get on to our main topic. The first one is that somewhat recently, since this is the first episode, this didn't happen like yesterday, but Coderwall announced that they did open source their main product, and this sort of ties into the discussion in 2 weeks about still being a profitable company with an open source core. And they open sourced that on the Assembly Made platform, which is this really interesting, different model for funding open source companies where open source contributors to the projects can earn these, they call them app coins, and that gives you almost like a share in the company. And then when the company makes money, that is distributed in some way among the people who have earned those app coins. So it's this interesting model that I've not seen used before.
Did they also write the other piece of software, Assembly, or is that something that already existed?
The main guy behind Coderwall is also the same. It's Matt Dieters. I forget his name exactly. Yes, they wrote both platforms.
Awesome.
So if you want to be a company on that platform, you should definitely check out Assembly Made. It's really interesting, and Coderwall is sort of the flagship product of that platform right now. It is actually making money. It is actually sending that money to people who are contributing to their open source projects.
Awesome.
So if you want to contribute to it, like, you can check it out there and start earning some money from that.
Are you going to contribute, Sean?
I have
copious free time.
Yes, I was thinking about it. There are a bunch of issues. There are a lot of different things that you could do, and they range in difficulty. I definitely want to give it a try and see how this model works out, and I think it's really interesting and worth exploring.
So how are they going to? I mean, how are they going to manage, like, if my vision for Coderwall doesn't match their vision for Coderwall, and I decide to commit a bunch of craziness, like, do I still get AppCoin or what?
That's a good question. There is still a core team, and that is the team accepting pull requests and rewarding the bounties. Bounties being the issues with app coins associated with them. So you can have a discussion about what the vision is going to be like, but you can't force your own vision.
Seems to make sense. And can I mine app coins?
No, there's no.
They're not a cryptocurrency?
They're not a cryptocurrency. They're
suddenly much less interested.
Well, maybe you should send a pull request to Assembly Made, and it's not working.
Very cool.
All right, so if you're interested in that, you can go check those out. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the MPAA is sending DMCA takedown notices to GitHub, and this isn't necessarily new. Like, GitHub actually has this really interesting repo where they expose the actual contents of all of their DMCA takedown notices. But this is, I mean, obviously the MPAA likes to do things that don't make a lot of sense, that are really just sort of aggressive tactics that try to, well, it seems like they just try to scare people off from doing things they don't like. So they actually pulled down the popcorn time repository, which, if you're not familiar with, is this really interesting app that will let you browse a whole bunch of movies and TV shows in this really fluid, awesome interface, and then you just click what you want to watch, and it goes and grabs the torrent and starts streaming it immediately.
Right. So
and obviously
the weird thing about this is they didn't take it's not a DMCA because, like, someone had published closed source code on GitHub. This is just like a product they don't like, and so they thought, let's do DMCA to get rid of this.
Yeah, there isn't just a giant cache of stolen videos in the repository. It's literally just the code that facilitates that. So it is sort of a weird situation because it's the code's purpose, like its explicit purpose, is to pirate content. Yeah. And that's way different from BitTorrent, which its explicit purpose is just to make it easy to distribute files. They could be legal or illegal in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. On the one, this seems like the least egregious thing that they've done, if you count some other more high-profile things. But I'm still of two minds about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on Hangouts, but it seems like a slight abuse of what this law was for. Like,
it does.
They probably should have just sued the guys and not, like, issued a takedown notice to where their product happened to be hosted.
Yeah.
But, I mean, plus, is this giving like a Streisand effect? Like, was this actually really on the Popcorn Time guys and gals docket? Was this just like they're going to host it someplace else anyway, but this is where they're going to get all their press?
Maybe. I mean, it's you always run that risk when there's some high-profile condemnation like this.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So that was the news we wanted to get to. Now we'll get on to the topic of the ideal package management for browsers.
This is the part I'm excited about. Should we have unmute everyone else and have them introduce themselves, and
yes.
why they're on this, why we've brought them here?
Yeah. So let's go in order so that we can get everyone going through here. Dusty, why don't you go first? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Dusty Burwell. I work with Trek and Sean at Groupon on a different team however. They brought me on here, I guess, as like the cranky old geezer who's going to say that package management for JavaScript is silly. So I just did my piece, so I guess I'll say goodbye and sign off.
All right, Stefan.
Oh, your order is quite different than mine.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Hi, I'm Steph. I work for a company called Yap. We do Ember Consulting and have a product as well. I'm addicted to open source and very active on GitHub. Last few years has been a lot of front-end JavaScript-related work.
And Steph's also on Ember Core with me and
Yes,
works on the Ember CLI tool, which is where package management sort of hits us most pressingly.
Yeah. All right, Laurie.
Hi, I'm Laurie Voss, and I work at NPM, and we have strong thoughts about package management.
And Guy?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm a South African web developer. I work on a travel site in Cape Town, and been working on a side project for a while called JSPM, kind of focusing on how we can look at package management as we go towards year 6. So I think, yeah, it'll be certainly an interesting conversation to have this kind of a perspective as well. So yeah, I'm quite excited to see what we can discuss around that.
So Sean and I were having this conversation earlier. What was the earliest package manager everyone used? I'll start. I actually used CPAN back in like 1999.
It's not a package manager, though.
I mean, kinda, yeah.
It's
Get
a
packages
package.
and download them.
It's a package registry, but right, like you're still downloading it with your browser. The first thing that I think of is like a bit of software that I use to download packages. I guess it's apt is the first one that I'm really familiar with.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Steph?
Probably apt, but the first one that I liked was Pac-Man, Arch's Pac-Man.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And I think anyone that has used Mac ports, that's where I cut my teeth on the pain of package management. I think it wasn't as much the package management system, but rather the quality of keeping packages usable. You'd use one package and you'd spend the entire weekend fixing all the packages you needed and then submitting PRs. There weren't PRs back then. Submitting tarballs to various people to get things updated.
And Dusty doesn't like package managers, so when did you first use curl?
Oh, God.
Come on, email and zip files, right?
Totally, yeah. And we still, we just store all of our source code on networks share. We don't.
We do not do
repositories.
that.
Well, it depends on which side of the globe you're on. But yeah, my first was CPAN as well. Obviously, Laurie doesn't think that that's a valid answer.
We can get into what is and is not a package manager. What about Guy?
Yeah, probably also apt. But I was going to say, I mean, does zip files count?
They sort of count. Mine was probably apt as well. As far as like a programming package manager, I was really late to that game. I was in .NET for a long time, so I used NuGet when it first started coming out. But yeah.
So Laurie had strong feelings that like maybe CPAN is not a package manager. Do you want to help us define what a package manager is? I feel like there's a lot of confusion around what is and what is not, based on people's experience with what they've used before.
Yeah.
Well, so at NPM we have this problem where everything is called NPM. So there's NPM the registry, that's very closely analogous to CPAN. It's where you go and look at the packages and see what package is the one that you want, and that's a very important feature of package management. But the thing that we think of as the package manager is NPM the CLI, and that's the thing that it's downloading the packages for you. It's putting them where they're supposed to be, and it is to the extent that it does anything attempting to resolve dependencies. So like Ruby Gems is obviously a package manager. But like CPAN is a package registry, but it doesn't have a package manager.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yeah, I think my opinion is both discovery, registry, and resolution of dependencies, and probably finally getting the thing into a state that I can use it. However, that has to happen. Without any of these pieces, it's not quite as powerful, as useful as it could be. So.
And do those all need to be like the same system, or can these be interrelated subsystems? Or
I think they can be interrelated. I mean, so Ruby Gems works great with Bundler. People often see them as exactly the same thing, but In fact, they are not. They just happen to work somewhat, mostly harmoniously with one another.
So how does that relate? So I think that's a good way to describe package managers in general, but how does that relate to like module formats and what's actually in the package?
That probably happens when, as part of the, how can I utilize this that I now have on my machine, I think. Does that make sense? That there's like, so I have all of the dependencies, I found them, I discovered them, I downloaded them, I have them on disk, how can I now utilize them?
Yeah.
I think that's where the formats of what is in the bundles or tarballs actually matters.
And probably as like people who help write a big framework, like I think it's probably the part Steph and I care most about, and the part that is probably the most painful for us right now in JavaScript.
Yeah,
but you
we
can
actually
disagree, Steph.
We have a question from IRC. They want some clarity on Ruby gems. With that definition, Ruby gems would be a registry and bundler would be the package manager. They're asking if that's correct.
I think unfortunately there's a lot of overlap here. I would like to view bundler as purely the thing that resolves my dependencies for me and sets up my local environment to correctly utilize only the dependencies I expect to use. That's where I think bundler is quite strong. But there is overlap between the two, because Ruby gems actually, bundler interacts with Ruby gems in order to, like, they have shaped each other.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Stefan, with the fact that Ruby gems, well, and I guess we'll kind of get into this a little bit with the fact that Ruby gems didn't exist for quite a while after Ruby existed, but then the fact that bundler didn't exist while Ruby gems continued to have a life of its own prior to bundler, does that then mean that the dependency resolution itself doesn't necessarily have to be part of package management, or is that just an add-on?
I think it is to improve the package management experience. So here's the thing. When you start off with projects, when you start off with a package manager, you might be weaving together 5, 10, maybe only a few different packages. As you start relying on these package managers, you start weaving together 50, 60, 100, 200, thousands of these dependencies. At that point in time, proper resolution between these is quite important. And I think that's basically what happened with Ruby gems. Early on, it was, can I pull in the 3 libraries that I need to use? And as people built larger applications that each of these applications had dependencies that themselves had dependencies, the resolution aspect became a big problem. So I think Ruby gems initially solved the, can I get code to my machine quickly? Bundler then came in and said, okay, can I get the right code on the machine, and can I isolate the user's environment so we give them a little cocoon of only the libraries they expect to be running with. Is that clear?
So if you were adding a package manager for a language like, I don't know, one that does Go have a package manager yet? I feel like they still don't.
I think they just have. I shouldn't talk.
So Go's right on the borderline, right? So Go has you don't need to like download and install this stuff yourself. You just say go get and it'll turn up, but it doesn't have a package it has the dependency installation part without as much of the discovery portion.
And without a registry bit.
Right.
It's
not that it doesn't have a registry, it's that its registry is a giant file listing. Like it's like the minimum viable registry.
So if you were designing a package...
I think it's too soon in that Go PM actually exists. So
So if you were designing a package manager like for a new language from scratch, do you think you would need the sort of resolution tool, the registry, and the management part? Or are all of these necessary? Can you not have some of them and still get by?
I think as soon as you start stitching together more and more packages, you're very quickly going to want these other pieces of machinery, and these other pieces of machinery to work correctly. So yes, you can absolutely be productive and get somewhere without dependency resolution and without all this other fairly complicated stuff. But quickly, as you start stitching these things together, you want them to be reliable, and you also want your team members to also be able to consistently install what you have. Before Bundler, you would have Rails apps, and to get this Rails app running on your demo machine or something was actually painful, because Bundler not only does resolution, but it also encapsulates the environment to make sure other gems don't your system gems don't sneak in. Often what happens to me with NPM is I occasionally, my package will pull in something from my load path, and I will then distribute this package to many consumers, and they will not have make.rp, and people will be upset at me. Bundler has this concept of bundle exec, which basically drops everything else from the environment that's Ruby related, and then sets up the load paths to specifically only the bundled dependencies.
Yeah, there's a really good question in the IRC right now that I wanted to definitely bring up. They ask, why are there so many browser package managers but only one for Node and Ruby? And that's I have my own thoughts, but I'm also interested in hearing others.
Well, first, I'd like to backtrack just a little bit to an earlier thing somebody was saying about NPM.
Sure.
Like the problem that Bundler solves, that problem specifically is something that NPM that we're very focused on right now, because it is a big problem for people who are trying to do deploys properly. So there's shrink wrap, which was an attempt to solve that problem that doesn't work very well. But it's the right idea, and it's just something that we need to fix. And I think
can you elaborate what shrink wrap and lock files might be, and why would I care about them?
So the idea of a package JSON or a package manifest for any of these package managers is that they're going to say, these are my top level dependencies. This is what I need to run, and they have rules like, in the case of NPM, that has semver, so it has sort of semantic versioning. So it says, I can take version 1.1 point anything, and that'll be fine. And that's usually okay in a development environment. In a production environment, you want to be absolutely sure that you have exactly the same one that you were just testing before you put it into production. So you want to be able to say, I want 1.1.5 of this one, and 1.1.7 of that one, and 1.3.8 of that one. And that's basically what shrink wrap does. Shrink wrap recursively goes down the tree and says, what is the exact version that I have installed of every single package and all of its dependencies and all of their dependencies all the way down, and bundles that into a single file, which then theoretically can then be rehydrated on the other end without you actually having to bundle all of those physical packages into a giant file. You just have a small file that is your code plus this very, very strict manifest of the exact set of packages that was running before.
And just to compare that with Bundler, Bundler has something very similar, except Bundler's lock file is also used during development. So when you're sharing when you're working with a team, you check in your lock file. Bundler manages that lock file for you. You basically never touch it. And when you then share code with Trek, Trek will get an exact snapshot with no semver drift between
and
packages.
Honestly, that's probably a better model. Shrink wrap was something that was put together, as a contribution from outside. It was, it was better than nothing. It's not a great solution, and it's definitely something that we're going to address, I think.
That's fantastic. The key thing I found trying to use shrink wrap like the lock file is it's the developer's responsibility to basically manage shrink wrap.
Yeah, we really hate shrink wrap, and it especially what you're talking about in development, the way it doesn't keep up with you adding new dependencies and stuff like that. That's obviously just clown shoes. Like that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Makes me feel very good that you also think that way.
We just have so much stuff to fix. But I think I wanted to make a sort of wider point. People were saying like, what is a package manager? What is a viable package manager, right? Like, I think the answer is that the answer keeps getting more complicated. So, 5 years ago, just having any kind of registry at all would have been fine, and then you needed a program that did it, and then what became sort of table stakes for being a good package manager got better. People were like, yes, I want dependency resolution. Yes, I want something along the lines of bundler. Like, the whole class of software is just improving, and so everybody's getting better at the same time, and various people have got better at different parts of this sort of ecosystem faster.
Why wasn't this a solved problem many years ago?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably because software is a lot more social now. I think the Node community in particular is the sort of like extreme end of the spectrum there. Somebody in IRC was asking, why are there so many tiny Node packages? Why do we have, why do Node applications have so many dependencies? And it's because Node is sort of the extreme end of the spectrum of I'm not going to write anything. I'm going to just bring every little thing that I can think of. I'm going to turn it into a package, and somebody else will have written it before. So the bit of code that is my code is going to have the fewest wheels reinvented. And as a result, we have a package like mukdirp, which just does one thing, right? It does mukdir-p, and that's all it does. And that is very different from the way software used to be distributed. You used to have a big library that would be like, here's all the things I do with my files, and it's giant and monolithic. And the reason that packages are getting smaller and the number of dependencies is getting larger is because it's getting easier to do that, right? Node apps have lots and lots of dependencies because they can, is basically the answer.
I think this is the rise of open source, basically. As open source is becoming more and more popular and more contributions occur, you have more software to weave together. People are realizing shareability is important, knowledge sharing is important. As this happens, you just have more wealth to share. And as you have more wealth to share, you need a mechanism by which you can organize this wealth.
So between registries and package management and locking stuff down, what's next? What do you think the big next thing is that we're going to be emo about in 5 years and be like, oh my god, why didn't NPM ship with this out of the box? It's so retarded.
I think we have to solve our current problems first before we need to solve the current emo before we can move on to future emo.
Before we imagine problems in the future.
I mean, so NPM already thinks we know what the answer is going to be because we've already started working on the answer, which is that if you get used to using packages, you're going to want to use your own packages. And so, with apt you can do PPAs, but PPAs are, they are very hard to do. They are quite a pain to manage. Mm-hmm. And they're still semi-public. People will want to be able to say, okay, my whole application is just a package. I'm just going to think about everything as a package. There's not going to be any distinction between private code that's in GitHub repositories and public code that's in packages. Everything should just be packages, and some of them will be private and some of them will be public. And that's what NPM has been working on, the ability to allow people to publish a package that is private to them only, so that they can create their entire application using the same semantics of, I'm just going to install a bunch of packages.
Yeah, and real quick for anyone who doesn't know, a PPA stands for Personal Package Archive? I forget the acronym.
I saw the question and I was like, I have no idea what it stands for. But we install apt things.
We can define it regardless. It's the way that is it Ubuntu specific or Debian package manager? It's the way that apt lets you have your own registry for your own packages, but you put it up on the internet so that people can get updates for some app that you made that's not in the core Ubuntu registry, essentially. So it's like a registry in what we're talking about. The package manager apt can connect to it.
Exactly.
And do these work do you have to add both? How would resolution work between two of those? If I have an internal package named the same as something that happens to be open sourced, how do we know which one to install?
We won't let you do that. If you have private packages, you will be publishing them to a namespace. Like GitHub has usernames, and your repositories are underneath that username. It'll be like that. So it'll be npm npm/@celdo/ package. That will be where my private packages live. And the nice thing is that the way the JavaScript node modules resolution system works is that you don't actually have to change anything about the way Node works for that to work. You just create a directory called @celdo in node modules, and you put all the packages in there, and resolution works just the way that it works right now.
So you brought up namespaces, which I think is an important topic. Let's go over like the pros and cons of a registry actually using namespaces and what that means.
That's a little polite way of saying, why doesn't NPM have namespaces?
It's going to. We're nearly it is done, and it's just in beta.
That was
just a reminder. We don't have to go back, but there was a question about why does Ruby have one, Node have one, and the browser has n?
Infinite.
We can go back to that, but it seems like a very theme to our.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that.
Let's tackle that.
So one opinion I have, and I guess this is not just having seen the Ruby community grow. There were a few times where people forked Ruby gems, and even for a short period of time there was Gemcutter, and there was another entire fork of Ruby gems that existed. But it seems like the community felt strongly that unifying is more important than sharding. So often, almost immediately, a resolution happened where these teams or groups worked together, or one of the projects just died off, rather than sharding the world.
Yeah,
I think it tends to be in the browser land that many disjoint opinions never sort of coalesce into a single unified.
Yeah, but like disjointed opinions, that sounds like the Node community. Like why just one NPM if that's the case?
I think it's all about the target platform. Like for Ruby, the reason a lot of people started using Ruby was because of Rails, and that Ruby on Rails community needed a way to share their code, and it was really specific to Ruby on Rails, and it sort of grew out of that. And there wasn't really as much of a reason, I think, to actually shard and have conflicting ones, even though, like you said, it happened a little bit, but they managed to come together and make like a single standard. And Node was the same way, even though it was based on JavaScript. Like from the early days, there was this common JS format, and then somewhat early in its life, this NPM thing came out and got merged in. And that was just the standard, and then when it got really popular, no one had a reason to use anything else. But for JavaScript in the browser, that has existed for so long, and it's not just a single platform. People make their own frameworks, and then people want to write XJS, and they want to write, now more recently, like Backbone, Ember, Angular, Polymer, all kinds of stuff. And those are like completely separate platforms in this analogy. And over time, people wanted to solve package management in different ways, and there wasn't like one community to actually create a single solution.
I think there's also one more very important thing: flexibility. How many different class systems exist in JavaScript libraries? I think if you allow a lot of flexibility, which is good, it allows innovation, allows these things. There's no one way to do anything, which is good, but it also means if the general population doesn't agree on a single convention, there's no way to build on that convention and sort of take that next step and share the underlying primitive and build on top of it.
I think Stefan has hit the nail on the head. The key is flexibility. The key is the reason Ruby Gems worked for Ruby. The reason there's only one of it is because it works no matter what you're doing with Ruby. It doesn't matter if you're creating, a web app, or if you're, it works for Rails, and that's great. But it also works if you're doing like a CLI in Ruby. And NPM is the same way. NPM has this like proliferation of use cases. You can do web apps in it, but you can do CLI tools in it, and it's got a whole bunch of bells and whistles to do CLI tools that if they weren't there, somebody might have created another package manager that was better at that kind of stuff. And with the web package managers, I don't see that. I see the web package managers are a lot more opinionated about the way things should work, and as a result, they work very well for that thing. But if people have a different idea of how things should work, the package manager is too opinionated for it. It's not flexible enough to be both of those things at the same time, and so you get the forking and the splitting off of the two. And I don't think that's necessarily I don't think that's set in stone. I think it's possible that one of the package managers can become can mature enough, become flexible enough, become inclusive enough that everybody goes, okay, well, it's good enough for our uses now. Let's fold into that. And NPM sort of wants to be in the running to be that one for the web as well. It depends. It's very much an open question whether or not that will work. Like the difference between being a package manager for web assets and a package manager for server-side code is sufficiently great that it's not clear to anyone, I think, whether or not NPM can be all things to all people for that. But we certainly intend to try.
So
there's something to be said.
The other problem in the JavaScript world is people very quickly blend package management and sort of package assembly together. And out of pretty much any other platform, what we ship to the browser is incredibly finicky versus what we ship to our backend servers. We have file size constraints. We have a very hostile environment. And I think as soon as package management is blended with the tooling required to assemble what we deploy to our clients, it becomes much more difficult, and people can get lost in the wrong problems. So if we can figure out what those boundaries are and pick the right tools, debundler, for example, of asset assembly versus keep that out of NPM, but make sure that NPM provides all adequate information to those bundling tools, I think we'll get a little bit further along as well.
That's definitely a direction that we are that makes a lot of sense to us. In particular, I was talking about shrink wrap earlier. One of the reasons shrink wrap sucks is because shrink wrap is really good for the use case of the people who put it together, but their use case is not as good, or rather, their use case is not as general as they believed it to be. And so probably when we do overhaul shrink wrap, which is hopefully going to be a couple of months from now, it's going to be a case where we've carved out the functionality of shrink wrap, and we've said this, here is the default way that shrink wrap works, and it works differently now. But if this shrink wrap doesn't work for you, then you should be able to NPM install a different version of shrink wrap, your own shrink wrapper that works the way that you want it. And that kind of approach for working with asset bundling and all of the other things that you need for doing front-end stuff, that has to be the way it goes, because there's just not enough agreement on the front end about how things should be done, right? The whole idea that, even the concept of, oh, we should be minifying our JavaScripts and compressing them into a single file that people have been considering, a best practice. That might not be a best practice 5 years from now. In fact, it might not be a best practice 3 years from now if the way that browsers use Speedy and all of those other things gets adopted as fast as they seem to be getting adopted. It might begin to seem like this weird sort of, spacer GIF hack that we don't use anymore.
So let's talk about the actual challenges of package management for the browser more specifically. The thing that comes most immediately to mind, especially as a difference to Node itself, if you're going to keep with the JavaScript theme, is that it actually involves HTML, CSS, images. You want to share fonts. Widgets, fonts. How does all of this become a package that lives with everything else?
So not just a package, but with I think we should say there are assets that need to be shipped to the browser. Each of these different types of assets have different rules and requirements for being shipped to the browser. Now, if we have this, it turns out that modules often ship with a wide variety of options for you, and you must somehow choose the ones you want, because we can't currently ship everything to our clients. Whereas with NPM, I feel much more comfortable on the server side, bundling a few extra dependencies, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But shipping 15 make.ps to my client is absolutely not acceptable. The bandwidth is costly, the parse time is costly. My clients that are tech savvy that take a look at this are like, what is going on here? This is not good. So given the fact that we have not only do we have to choose what we want to send to our clients? We have to make sure that we send those things in the correct way. Did we crush the pings? Did we minify the CSS? Did we all these things? In addition, each of these different types of assets have sort of different types of dependency constraints.
Right.
Because JavaScript, you can well-formed modules, you can load multiple versions of the same libraries in the browser. Maybe people don't want to do this, but it is technically possible. That works. But it turns out if you try to do that with CSS, if you load Bootstrap v1 and Bootstrap v2 on the same page, I'm pretty confident you're gonna have a bad time. And the same with fonts. So these now we don't just have one type of dependency that we have to flush or to resolve. We actually have like multiple different types of dependencies that all have different constraints. And that's actually one of the conversations we've had with the NPM folks. Is so we like shipping JavaScript, but also turns out that often a component might have CSS with it. And as it turns out, we have to be very strict about components versioned that have CSS, but we can be less strict for components that don't bundle with CSS, mainly because of that. The CSS basically lack a module system, and we don't have Shadow DOM today.
Right. Shadow DOM, in case anyone's not familiar, is an upcoming feature of sorry, if someone else could probably explain it better, but it will essentially allow you to scope your HTML and CSS and JavaScript to a widget on the
and
page.
Events and everything,
events.
if you
So
want it or not.
Specifically, CSS can't leak out, and external CSS can't leak in.
Yeah, it's like iframes without the performance hit of having an iframe.
That is a much better way to say it than what I said. Yes. So let's talk about the the JavaScript specifically, because this is something I was really interested in. I wrote a blog post and gave a talk about this, and that's semver. And one of the things, we're talking a lot about package managements from the authors of the package manager's perspective, but I think there's a lot that the community can do to make this better, specifically for if we're focusing just on JavaScript for distribution to the web, and that is more appropriate use of semver. And if you're not familiar with semver specifically, if you go to semver.org, there's a site that describes it, but it's an official spec of how you structure your version numbers and what those numbers mean. And just real briefly, you often see version numbers that's 1.2.3, for example. 1 in this case is the major version, 2 is the minor version, and 3 is the patch version. And the way semver describes those numbers is that first number, the major one, means that if you try to upgrade that module to a new major version, so you want to go to 2.0, there are backwards incompatible changes. Maybe you aren't using those features that are backwards incompatible, but you need to check and make sure that that's not broken or upgrade your code. A change in that middle number, that minor number, means that there's new features, but they're still backwards compatible with the major number, so 1.3 instead of 1.2. You should be able to upgrade that without any problems. And then the third number is that patch number, means that we fixed some sort of security issue or bug, and you should be able to upgrade that freely because that's going to fix some problem that maybe you don't even know you have right now.
There is a issue, and that is, what if you're relying on the fact that the security concern, and so the question is that a major version bump then,
if you rely
is that just your shit out of luck?
Yeah, if you rely on the bug working the way that the bug does, and then they fix the bug, it's backwards incompatible as far as you're concerned because you were relying on the bug working the way that it worked.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuance. It's not clear cut, but I think if the module authors in general try to embrace this numbering in general, it would be helpful. I still see a lot of packages that are used by tons of people that's like 0.0.4, or probably higher than that, 0.0.50 or whatever, because they don't want to go to 1.0 until they're quote unquote done. And that's not helpful from figuring out when you can upgrade that package. But even beyond that, NPM changed, I forget what version, but I'm sure you could tell me, to use, when you NPM install, it will use the caret range instead of the tilde range by default.
Someone want to go into what those ranges are, because they've always been confusing to me, and they seem to be not at all standard across various package managers, which is frustrating.
So the caret range means that you will you think patch versions are okay, and so anything up to that patch version, anything within a patch version range is okay. So it means 1.1.x. It basically is what a caret version means. It says 1.1.1, but caret 1.1.1 means 1.1.1 at least or better.
All the way up to anything that's not 2.0, essentially.
Anything up to 1.2 point anything. It stays within the third digit.
Right, the tilde.
And the tilde, oh my god, I can't even remember what the tilde does exactly.
It's the spermie operator, guys. Come on.
Yeah, does somebody else remember the exact semantics of the tilde operator? All I remember is that it's less useful than caret.
I thought it was the other way around. The tilde
Yeah.
was the up to 1.2.0, and then the caret was all the way up to 2.0.0, just below that.
Am I getting that wrong? That would be embarrassing. Anyone a package manager get it?
We'll fix that. We'll fix it in post. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll just edit that out. Yeah, the tilde, the squiggly, used to be the default, and that would bring you up patch versions only.
Yeah, you got that.
Right.
You have it backwards.
All right.
I think basically the hat operator,
Right.
if that's what we're gonna call it. I'm going to so first of all let's just look at, rather than everyone can't remember everything, so I'm just going to link node semver, which is the implementation, I guess, that npm uses. And if you search for the hat, you will see an example, which goes on to show. I'm going to read it since this is a audio/video thing. When using caret operators, anything from the specified version, including pre-releases, will be supported up to, but not including, the next major version or its pre-release. 1.5.1 will satisfy hat 1.2.3, while 1.2.2 and 2.0.0 beta will not be.
That's very clear over audio.
Yeah,
So I would
definitely recommend people go read about it to get the exact definition. But
Right.
the interesting point is that the default changed in NPM to be more permissive into what you could upgrade to. Essentially, if you're following semver, it meant that you're willing to accept anything that the author considered backwards compatible changes.
Yes. In addition, I believe this was motivated a lot by some of the deduping work that's going on.
Yes.
I also know that Cargo, Rust's package manager, follows a similar default semantic where it will allow duplicates within the caret range, but it will not allow duplicates within the caret range. But it will, anyways. Ignore me. I'm
So where do where does this nomenclature and style come from? Like, is there some UR range description way back in like assembly? Like, who came up with this stuff?
I don't know.
We should add it to the semver spec, I think, because I think it's really useful. But
Yeah, it's frustrating to me that like different package managers don't do these things the same way. It's like really hard to navigate in multiple languages which version descriptions I'll be getting.
Yeah.
yeah, but the really exciting thing about the upgrade, the change to that default, is that for the browser specifically, if you use something like browserify to package up your node modules, then if people are using those caret ranges, you will get less total versions in your bundle. Like, they'll be able to use more common versions of a module. You have multiple modules that have dependencies on different versions of a third module. And I think
then Angular has Angular dependencies. So that's it. We should probably jump into web package, like web specific stuff. I think that was one of the goals of this discussion.
well, that is
There's also a question somewhat related to that popped by through Open Source Hangout, and that is, why does Ember CLI seem to prefer NPM over Bower? My answer to this is it actually supports both, but I personally feel that any problem that needs to be solved with two package managers, you've already lost. If we're distributing Ember CLI itself and add-ons for the CLI via NPM, I would much prefer to live in a world where everything just comes from a single package management system. This means there's less caveats, there's less things for people to learn. One of the plans is to utilize Guy Bedford's JSPM to allow you to pull from various different sources. But I do believe going forward, we're going to work with NPM folks to make the NPM experience as first class as possible. And maybe we should use that to sort of lead into why the web stuff.
So I feel like the feedback I hear from that from everyone is like, use browserify, CommonJS, and now you can use Node or NPM right away.
Yeah, that's what I do for just personal stuff.
That's what I meant. Sean just says that to me every day. Why aren't we just using CommonJS and browserify?
No, I understand from like a community like Ember, you want to prescribe something for Ember modules, and this is how you share them. And that's much more complex than just use CommonJS. And but me as like for my apps, me personally writing whatever, that I just ignore everything that's not in CommonJS and NPM.
Yeah, our goal is absolutely just providing the foundation for our community to continue to share. We have a lot of smart, active developers that are super enthusiastic. We just want to enable them to continue to share in a way that's compatible, composable with the rest of the community, in order for us just to continue to accelerate forward rather than having to reinvent the wheel and having to not share. So the more we can share, the better we're off.
The question that I get asked a lot is, when I install Bower, I npm install Bower. So why am I installing Bower? And obviously, like, as an employee of npm, like, that's a great question as far as I'm concerned. Except I apt-get install Node, right? Like, we use package managers within package managers before we started using npm to install Bower, and we didn't think it was crazy then.
Well, it's kind of like saying my machine bootstraps with assembly. Why do I need C? My machine bootstraps with assembly. Why do I need C? I mean,
exactly.
There's different tools for different things. One of the things that is nice about people that don't have that much experience with Node and JavaScript, especially like npm versus Bower, is they know sort of with confidence that everything in Bower, in theory, works in the browser, whereas everything in npm does not, in theory, work with browserify in the browser. Browserify is pretty cool. It's super impressive, but it is quite simple to accidentally pull in a very large tree. It's also very simple to run into a scenario where you're trying to pull in a library that just doesn't work. For example, the other day I was trying to make an aspect of Mocha work in the browser, and for some reason, although Mocha works in the browser, I couldn't actually get Mocha to work correctly via browserify, or this part of Mocha to work. And I went to the issue tracker, and the author was like, yeah, well, it sucks for browserify. And this kind of boggled my mind, because Mocha, if I just include it, works in the browser. Why can't I also just browserify it? So instead, I had to like do a weird jerry-rigging thing to make this actually work. Very surprising. So I think browserify has some really strange edge cases that require you, when there's a problem, require you to have some fairly deep understanding, or you are stuck.
Yeah, it's definitely not just a super clean use it and not worry about it. So maybe we could talk a bit about some of the plans for NPM specifically to grow into the package manager we all deserve for the web specifically.
I'm assuming you mean Lori. I mean, I could talk about that too, but I would just be spouting nonsense.
Right. Yeah, Lori,
I feel like I already talked about that to the degree that I wanted that we know the answer, right? Like the answer is we want to be able to. We don't the sort of design philosophy of npm, if it has one, is basically do what you want, and we will try and make that as easy as possible. So I don't think the way that people manage packages for browsers is mature enough, and I don't think there's enough agreement for us to be able to pick a winner and say, yes, this way works better than all the other ways. Let's do it this way, and the way that, say, the module loading in Node worked for JavaScript. So it would be it would be a really bad idea for NPM to say to prematurely say we like it this way and no other way, because then that's, like I said earlier, that's the thing that's going to lead to the community forking.
So the standards body has gone and done this. They have gone and made a new module system or new module format or module syntax, and have provided this to the world and said, hey, this is going to work quite well in the browser. This will work quite well in Node. Go forth and use this. What is NPM's feeling about ES6 module syntax?
I am going to stay completely away from that topic. I just don't, honestly, I don't know as much about it. I don't know enough about it to talk about it authoritatively. The people who know about ES6 properly are Forrest and Isaac, and I am much more concerned with the registry aspects of what NPM does, which is why I was able to get what semver does wrong. The only thing I will say about the ES6 spec is that it does seem like it's not as baked as people thought it was 2 months ago, and so that's a little bit disappointing. And just in general, it means that we're all going to wait a little bit longer before we can say yes, this is definitely the way it's going to work. Because
which aspect of it is not baked, or is that just a sweeping statement that it itself is not baked?
They sort of, I'm unfamiliar with the details again, and I don't want to overstep, but the TC39 basically went back and said, we are going to change a bunch of things that people have been thinking of as baked for the last 3 months, or we're going to reopen them, or we're going to say that these are not yet part of the standard, and we're going to think about them again. And that sets back ES6 by 6 months or so, which doesn't mean that it's that doesn't mean that it's a fatal blow, but it does mean that it's not, ready to start baking and shipping into everything like people were hoping it would be a couple of months ago.
Some of us have been using the syntax for over a year, and I think guys should actually be clear about what that change was.
Yeah, so to clarify, it was a minor syntactical change in the module syntax, and this is something that it didn't actually set back the specification itself. So the delay of the specification was an entirely separate decision. And the module syntax that was being used was changed due to user feedback. So people who had used this module syntax said that it was a confusing syntax to use. It was also a very minor syntax. So it was a part of the syntax that most people using ES6 modules probably wouldn't have even known existed or known that they could use it. So it was one of those things that was a very minor change, and one of the biggest people who was affected by it was actually using it incorrectly themselves, which in a lot of ways validated that decision. But it was a very minor change actually when it comes down to it. But certainly I understand the resistance in terms of considering ES6 modules as a done thing, and I don't think we should consider them as a done thing. It is still a draft specification. But that doesn't mean we can't start building tooling on top of it and learning those lessons, and that's the feedback that can go back into the spec and improve things. But the question about it comes very much down to the environment, I think, and Node's kind of grown from the server-side CommonJS module format, which is at its core a synchronous format. And ES6 modules start as an asynchronous format in the browser. So the browser is the first class platform there. And I think working in terms of approaches like that opens the door for those kind of speedy type optimizations in the future. So yeah, that's my kind of take on it. But
I apologize if I misrepresented the state of the ES6 thing there.
Oh,
that's okay.
Yeah, no
I don't
problem.
think you're the only one that's
completely
confused
fair.
about it. I don't think you're the only one that's confused about it. I think that
the subject as well. Yeah.
yes. As a positive note, for someone who has been using the syntax via transpilers for over a year, it's wonderful. It is. I'm starting to ride my Node code like this as well. It's a very nice experience. A lot of good thought has gone into this. If there is a successor to CJS on the server side, this would be, in my opinion, a very welcome one. If it'll happen, I don't know. In the browser world, I think we have more malleability. We can make these changes. hopefully with a common module system that actually ships in the browsers, people can then use that as the foundation to build more abstractions on top of it. And maybe that will enable a sort of unified package management solution as well.
So is it up to the package manager to like dictate or even care about what module format is being used by a language?
I don't think so. I mean, speaking with Isaac, someone once submitted a Futurama episode to NPM, and it seemed to work fine. So if we decide that all of our front-end JavaScript should actually be encoded as Futurama episodes, NPM I don't think cares. They probably don't want to have large files like that, but they don't really care. What does matter, though, is if people want to share ES6 code between client and server, a convention around this must exist, either via tracer or something else. A few people have started using the JS next keyword in package.json to specify the entry point for their ES6 graph. I know I maintain RSVP, which has ES6 modules, and tracer depends on it, and they just require by manually finding the path and pulling in their modules that they want. This is clearly not fantastic.
So
making in some more conventions here would be wonderful.
Are you talking about authoring in like one format and publishing to many, or you just no?
Correct.
Okay.
So my current stance is this: is I ship ES6. I also generate CJS, AMD, anonymous AMD, and global, which is kind of ghetto, but.
So I mentioned doing this on the Twitter world, and Guy very politely was telling me I was an idiot earlier because of circular references, but I don't know much about that. Can someone enlighten me about why I'm stupid?
Yeah, so for my project, the projects that I do ship like this, cycles aren't a problem. But for example, if we decide to go and ship Ember, all of Ember as one of these types of builds, they might be incompatible. We're basically going from a high fidelity module syntax to a potentially low fidelity module syntax, and you lose some fidelity, which can cause problems.
What's the high and the, maybe Guy could unpack the difference between high and low fidelity and what circular references play into.
Yeah, Guy would be the best person to ask about that, because I
Sure,
believe that this is what he lives and breathes.
To cover some of that. But yeah, I mean, circular references, unfortunately, they are one of those situations that is lovely to ignore and pretend it will never happen. Yeah, when I first started writing module loaders, it was kind of like an edge case you would don't really see as an important thing when considering a module loader. But when it comes down to it, the edge cases define the system. So the way that you have to write everything is determined by the way circular references behave. So a lot of the spec, the ES6 spec itself, ends up just covering how to deal with circular references. So yeah, the kind of, in an ideal world, we would transpile everything into a single format.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It doesn't work in general because of the fact that your circular references will stop working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's a bummer, but like, is there a way? So if I was writing libraries or frameworks and I wanted to please everyone, is there any way to avoid circular references? Like, can I author in a particular way and just not have to deal with them, or am I just
absolutely
screwed?
Absolutely. The place where I find circular references come up is when you have code that you refactor, and as part of the refactoring step, you have created a cycle, maybe temporarily, maybe it just makes sense. The other place is when you're moving legacy code, large amounts of legacy code, where specific types of cycles were just happened organically and they worked. You're going to have some of these issues. Every cycle that I have seen, it is possible to work out. Although sometimes these cycles are not entirely obvious that they exist, especially when you have a large module graph that you have dependencies. Depending on the order that you require stuff, you could create a cycle that would not normally exist. The nice thing about ES6 syntax is it absorbs this correctly in most scenarios. Whereas other systems do not, and you end up with like a partially built module. That this happens to me in Node occasionally, and it's surprising and unfortunate. So the answer is yes, you can likely always refactor it to be a little bit better, although as the system gets more complicated, you can have like implicit cycles that have been created depending on which modules were imported.
The question's really about how you, about how you want to distribute your code. So if you want to distribute a bundle for people to use, that bundle might contain circular references internally, which is not a problem because this bundle is designed to work for them. And that bundle can be designed to run in ES6 environments or CommonJS environments. But if you want to distribute your code in a way that the third-party dependencies aren't already built in, then you have to make sure that there's some further agreement. So to just explain that problem a little bit more clearly, say I'm writing a library that is built on top of React. So I'm writing a React component. And I want to distribute this component for other people to use, but I don't want to include React in that distributed version. I just want to include the library itself. I can make a bundle of everything including React, and I can distribute to you that component. Then I have to make sure that I'm creating that dependency on React in a modular way that can work in a particular module system. So I would have to build into a module format like CommonJS or ES6 so that you can easily load that module, if that makes sense. So in terms of whether or not you include your third-party dependencies as part of your bundling process, in Node.js we do this all the time. So I load a module, but I'm not loading its dependencies. I'm loading them themselves as separate modules. But in the browser, we haven't been able to do this yet properly unless you're just using CommonJS. So it's where the problem of module format you're using, it's how you're bundling up and for package authors at the moment, that you have to kind of distribute different options depending on how someone's going to consume that package.
So you're saying that the thing we need to solve is not necessarily the formats, but how these formats interop with each other based on the package manager.
Exactly. Yes, because we're sort of moving beyond globals at the moment.
And if we can nail that, we solve a substantial problem.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, but even before a solution to that is found and propagated, I think we could benefit from some discoverability. Like if you want to, if you really just want to ignore everything else and say that I work on the browser, but I still want to publish to NPM, I definitely don't work in Node. Like, how do I describe my package in such a way that someone can find it and know that specifically? I think that would be useful.
So
Not stopgap, but
I think people are using keywords for this.
yes.
Yeah, that's this is closer to my area since I'm spending more of my time on the registry these days. That is something we are specifically solving right now. Is the ability to we have two new concepts coming up in the registry. One is going to be called collections, which is going to be like a curated set of modules that you can describe. So if you think of like this is, I have a robot project or something, and I want to say that, I want to give instructions about how to get started with robots, or I want to say these packages work together well, and I want to teach you how to use them, then I'll create this collection of, between 1 and, say, 20 packages, and I'll say this is how you use this one, and then you use this one, and then you install this one, and this is the steps. And it's, a sort of a curated guide through a set of packages that work well together, which is something that people have asked for a lot. And then the other concept is one of ecosystems, which, if you can think of it as a collection, is a small curated set. An ecosystem is a much larger, automatically described set in some way. So an ecosystem would be something like browserify compatible packages would be an ecosystem, or in this case, things that work well with Ember, things that work well with Angular. Any sort of programmatically determinable set of packages that you want to be able to search with and filter by, that would be an ecosystem. So an ecosystem would be maintained by an API by some third party. So the people who are doing a bunch of good work over in Gruntland have been, they've been curating a set of packages, that work for Grunt and are Grunt related. That would be something that they would be able to fold into the registry and expose at the registry level. Would be able to say, we make a new API call once a day that tells the registry, here are all the packages we know about that are compatible with our tests, or have the correct tags that we believe are enough, or we've examined their code and they seem to be fine. And various people would be able to maintain separate ecosystems. So you'd be able to, all within the NPM registry, you'd be able to get more specific functionality and more granularity of search around packages that work within that ecosystem and are, I don't want to say approved, or I don't want to say endorsed, but in some way verified, let's say, as being part of that ecosystem.
So how does that play in with like peer dependencies, for example?
Touchy subject.
Peer dependencies are kind of a mess. It's another one of those situations that I don't want to get too deep into the details lest I overstep or misstate our current situation on peer dependencies. What I can say is that as they are currently implemented, they do not work, and we do not believe that they work. We're not saying this is fine, and we're going to have to fix them somehow, but the exact way that we have to fix them is not clear to me, at least yet.
Cool. I think that sounds pretty great. So we should wrap up, but does anyone have any closing thoughts before we go?
I would like to.
I think the community seems to be making like great progress here. I think the most important thing is for us to attempt to unify this, even if it takes more time, takes more energy. There's a lot of smart developers in various niches, and working together is just going to, like, come on, no one except for Lori, no one's job is working on package managers, so we want to ship our products. We want to like skip this step and ship our products. So the more we can collaborate on this unfortunate intermediate step, the better. At least that's like from an app developer standpoint, that is my feeling.
I mean, that's definitely the sense that I get from a bunch of corners. I've heard from you guys at Ember, and I've heard from the Angular guys, and I've heard from a couple other people who are doing less well-known browser-related package stuff. We're ready to go. We've picked this thing. Let's, somebody come out and say, do it this way. Like, there's a lot of people. There's, a lot of noise and conflict and confusion about the best way to do things, and people really, a lot of developers just say, just tell me which one to use, tell me what to do. And like I said earlier, NPM doesn't want to be the one to do that. Like, weirdly, it would be it would be easiest for us to do that because we'd just say, do it this way, and then suddenly it will work well with NPM. But at the same time, we're really, really wary of doing that, because if you pick the wrong one, then you've screwed a bunch of people who will then have to go and use some other package manager or do some crazy hack to make it work. And as long as we would prefer the community to land on it. So like you said, let's not wait for the package managers. Let's just ship products and pick something. That's exactly what we want you to do at NPM. We want you to pick something and let everybody else pick something, and then months or possibly even years down the line, when it's clear what it is that people are using, that will be the right time to build it into the registries. And in the meantime, we hope that the registry will work no matter which one you pick.
Yeah, sounds great. Anyone else have some quick closing thoughts?
Sure. This is maybe completely throws everything that everybody said up in the air and says, bah, but maybe that was my reason for existing. Anyway. But I was just kind of thinking along the lines of a lot of the discussion today has been centered around the concept of, or at least to me sounds like centered around the concept of heavy front-end JavaScript applications where you're building an Ember. Angular was mentioned, Backbone was mentioned, things where you're generally building an application in JavaScript that lives within the browser and then functions as kind of a conduit to to talk to an API or something like that. I think potentially completely left out of this discussion, and potentially completely left out of the discussion in general, are those developers who are interested in adding some JavaScript to their website, something that makes their generally static website more interactive, which I think is a lot of the web still. And so I think moving forward, this discussion will have to keep those people in mind, because going kind of back to the question of why is there a single package manager for Ruby, why is there a single package manager for Node, but there's not a single package manager for the browser, my kind of theory for that is that there is a centralized community. There's somebody who's saying, somebody being Ruby, and the Ruby installer saying, hey, you get gem, and that's just part of the deal. And so trying to stray from that takes effort. And the same thing can be said for Node. NPM at this point is packaged as part of the downloadable. As you install Node, you get NPM. But there's no centralized community for web development at this point. The solution that the Ember team is working on using NPM is going to be great, and it's going to be prescribed for Ember users and developers, but it's not necessarily going to be very prescriptive for any other community unless all of those communities are pulled in, and including developers who aren't necessarily writing web applications, front-end applications using JavaScript. Just my 2 cents.
I think there's absolutely overlap between these things, but I think it should be seen as a positive statement.
I have to say I'm very much on your side, Dusty, in terms of being sort of an old school web dev. And when I gave a talk recently to a bunch of people at Hack Reactor who have just spent 6 weeks learning how to build web applications, and one of the sort of the topic of the talk was over the last 15 years, here's the stuff that everybody already knows. And one of the things that I said that I don't think enough new web devs get is that you don't have to build a rich JavaScript application to build a website. People have a lot of new devs sort of look at web development and they go, oh, static sites are the old way, and rich web applications are the new hotness, and this is the way you do it. When it's actually a spectrum. Sometimes, depending what the purpose of your website is, a static site is going to make sense, or a rich web app is going to make sense. Like NPM's website, it's never going to be a rich web app. There's no reason for it to be a rich web app. 95% of the people who turn up on our website, they are turning up as a result of a Google search to look at a package, read the package, work out if it's the package that they want, and then they immediately leave. That's how they work. There's no reason to load a rich web application to do that. It would be super annoying if we did.
Absolutely. And as a example of an application that each of us uses that kind of follows that same path is GitHub. GitHub is mostly static, and then they pull in some dynamism in order to make the application a whole lot easier to use.
So for someone who manages hundreds, if not more, issues a day, thousands maybe, I would very much like it if it was even faster and even more crisp, and even more single page like. I would love if the back button worked. So if I switched in a tab, I would love if it worked.
I
would love if it was more web appy than just web appy.
We could talk for an hour on how to improve GitHub, as amazing as it is. All right, Guy, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up before we left?
I'm not sure. I think we've covered a good amount. I mean, in terms of the whole static site thing, I think if we can develop ecosystems around truly modular front-end code, I think that will still go back and benefit static sites. I mean, if you think of things like your comments box at the bottom of the page, your share widgets. All of that stuff should be modular. So I think it can feed back into these people who just want to quickly load in little things into their sites. And there'll be more widgets or kind of functionality. They just copy this into your site, and you'll bring that in as that feature. I think we can potentially move towards growing that kind of an ecosystem, which could be interesting. Yeah, that's most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. What about you, Trek? Do you have anything else?
Nope, no, I'm an amateur in this space. I was just here to make sure people said smart things, and they did.
Awesome. All right, we are going to wrap this up. I just wanted to thank all of our awesome guests for coming. I think it was a really great discussion. I also want to mention that this isn't...
One last plug, and that is for Guy Bedford's JSPM. You guys should go to jspm.io, and I think this has good legs for a sane way of dealing with browser package management that utilizes existing things like GitHub and Bower and NPM. So I would suggest you guys look at this, and it also looks at it in the light of the new ES6 syntax and ES6 loader and stuff. So.
Yeah, for sure. All the things that we've talked about, there are going to be show notes with links, so you can follow up on that. If you want to watch this later, it will be up on YouTube, and it'll be published under this account, this open source Hangout account. I do want to make it clear that we don't consider this like the definitive discussion of everything package manager. It was just a discussion about package managers. For example, we didn't have someone from Bower here, and we didn't have someone from Components talking about those technologies directly. But I think it's part of an ongoing discussion. I think it was really great. Definitely stay tuned in future weeks. This open source Hangout will run every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central. And you can always check out the show at opensourcehangout.com. And right now it's going to point to the open source Hangouts on air. But if we decide to move from that URL will change to reflect that. And definitely send us feedback on things you liked, things you didn't, and things that we can talk about in the future. That's it. So we'll see everyone next week.